Okay, so I'm back. Again.
Another one.
Earlier than expected. Again.
Another one.
To talk about Skirk. Again.
And another one.
So, as you guys know, Hoyoverse released the character teaser for their upcoming unit Skirk, and precisely as we recently did with her animated short, this teaser contains a bunch of details that are worth analyzing and going over. So, we are precisely going to do that, and without wasting any time, let's get into it.
スカークの行方か。手がかりはあるのかな。
それが師匠は謎めいた人で。
どんな人物かがわからないことにはな。
Okay, so this scene at the very beginning seems like a super simple interaction between Peruer and Tartaglia, where Peruer expects that Ajax wants her to track down his master Skirk. This is probably taking place right after the Fontaine Archon quest, Masquerade of the Guilty, once Skirk, or rather I should say Nouvellette and the Traveler, defeat the all-devouring Narwhal Tahur, which is the embodiment of Tartaglia's constellation as far as we know for now. Skirk shows up, she takes Child and then yeets him through an abyssal rift or an abyssal portal into the world of Tevat, or the realm of Tevat, the human realm, after which the Fatui find him and Peruer takes him back to Snezhnaya. We later get to see an interaction between Peruer and Ajax, and this specific scene is probably taking place between Tartaglia being yeeted by Skirk from the Primordial Sea after defeating the all-devouring Narwhal, and his interaction later with Peruer in her story quest. This scene should be between those two in terms of timeline. Now that we have established the timeline, the primary point I want you guys to take home is the interaction itself as a kind of foreshadowing for the future, because this could be a hint for later down the line. Peruer tells Tartaglia, do you want me to help you track down Skirk, since Tartaglia probably told her that Skirk yeeted him out of the Primordial Sea, and Ajax of course replies by stating that tracking down his master Skirk would be an extremely arduous achievement even for the House of the Heart and Peruer, who probably have a very strong and reliable intel network and a bunch of really experienced spies, including Arlecchino herself, Peruer. Therefore, from a surface level point of view, this interaction is completely meaningless. There is no lore or story reason for Ajax to or for Hoyoverse rather, to animate a scene where they show us Ajax interacting with Peruer, since this does not further the plot, because remember, Ajax literally just told Peruer you don't have to track Skirk, so there is no reason for them to show us this interaction, and as far as we know, Peruer and Ajax are not really friends. They are allies by virtue of being under the same organization. However, you guys have to remember that the Harbingers of the Fatui are not exactly on friendly terms, especially when it comes to Peruer. She explicitly hates a bunch of Harbingers like Pantalone and Pulcinella. The only one Peruer really respects is Il Capitano, I suppose. This is why we have to be careful when looking into this scene and trying to analyze its lore purpose. Because beyond a surface level analysis, this interaction might actually be part of an effort for Hoyoverse to build like a type of resume, I suppose, in order to establish a connection between Peruer and Ajax for a later alliance, a legitimate alliance in the future. Otherwise, the scene is literally completely meaningless, and we could have had Ajax sitting on his own and remembering the days of his training with Skirk. And if you think about it, this actually makes a lot of sense, because Hoyoverse, over the past couple of years, they have been planting seeds and foreshadowing some kind of a future alliance between Ajax and Peruer. Now, of course, this remains a theory, which is extremely important to keep in mind, and it remains largely speculation. Everything I am about to say could literally not happen. However, we have hints from various different voice lines, including Tartaglia's own voice line and the voice lines of Scaramouche, that Arlecchino might herself end up defecting from the Fatui due to a conflict of interest or a conflict or difference in their ideologies, because we already know that Peruer has a very different mentality from someone like, let's say, for example, Zandiq. And Zandiq works directly under Piero and directly under the Tsaritsa. So what Zandiq does is going to be largely in line with the Tsaritsa. And if that is true, then Peruer might literally end up reaching a point where she has to defect from the Fatui because their goal ends up contradicting with her own moral worldview or something along those lines. And Zandiq is not the only Harbinger she does not like. There is, of course, like I said earlier, Pulcinella and Pantalone, and perhaps someone else too. We even get another hint towards this possibility at the end of her own story quest, the one where she talks with Tartaglia, where she says that in the future, a crimson moon might shine on top of Snezhnaya. This is essentially a metaphorical type of foreshadowing, where the crimson moon represents like the authority. When I say authority, I don't mean superpower, I mean the royal authority of Peruer's bloodline, her crimson moon dynasty bloodline. So when she says the crimson moon will shine above Snezhnaya, This could imply that she will usurp the authority of the Cryo Archon and take over Snezhnaya. Doesn't necessarily have to be her taking over Snezhnaya, it could be her fighting against the Fatui, but I think you guys understand the general idea of when Peruer says a crimson moon might end up shining above Snezhnaya later down the line. It means that she might usurp the authority of the Tsaritsa. Peruer herself even suggests that such a thing might happen in her voice lines, by the way. However, if she really ends up reaching a point where she has to accomplish this, then we all know that Arlecchino, as strong as she might be, cannot possibly fight the Tsaritsa and Piero, and also Zandik is way stronger than her as well, since she is number 4 and he is number 2. So in such a scenario, which has been hinted at extensively in the past couple of years, Peruer is going to need allies. This could be why Peruer and Ajax were earlier set up during the Fontaine Archon Quest series. Their usage in the Fontaine Archon Quest series could actually be a clever move by the developers, where you can conveniently have Peruer be there since she was in the House of the Hearth in Fontaine, so she has relations to the land itself, and then you can have Tartaglia Ajax be in Fontaine by virtue of Tahur, the all-devouring narwhal. However, it could also be used as a setup to have some kind of alliance between the two characters later down the line. After the Fontaine Archon Quest, we have this scene in front of us. This is another, I suppose, furtherance of their relationship, and then after this scene, we have, chronologically speaking, their interaction during her story quest. And that interaction is quite important because this is where Peruer goes beyond their, I suppose, work alliance in the Fatui and starts talking about Ajax's family in Snezhnaya. And that is precisely where I think Peruer could have some form of leverage over the loyalty of Tartaglia on her side. Because if the actions of the Fatui later down the line and the actions of the Tsaritsa and Piero end up endangering Tartaglia's family in some kind of way, then the House of the Hearth, which is effectively an orphanage overseen by Arlecchino, the knave, could act as a sanctuary and a refuge where Tartaglia's family could find succor. Such an event would in turn create an ultimatum for Ajax, where he now has to choose between his loyalty for the Tsaritsa and the cause of Piero and the Fatui, and his love for his family, in which case I strongly suspect that Ajax will select the latter, his family, therefore allying himself with Peruer. Now, aside from all the story hints I just gave you, there are other thematic and symbolic lore hints in Genshin's established universe that actually support such a thing to occur in the future. I won't go into too much detail about them because I think we have talked enough about Peruer and Ajax at this point. This video is primarily about Skirk. However, I have made 2 different videos discussing the story of Ajax the hero and how Ajax the fool, our Ajax, Tartaglia, mirrors the story of Ajax the hero, who was inhabited by the Voyager and who later married the first angel. And of course, we know that Peruer, Arlecchino, is very much angelic in her design symbolism. Now, a lot of people are going to say she is demonic, but in this case, you guys have to remember that demons are fallen angels. So yes, Peruer does have angelic symbolism. And also the seraphim, whom she is inspired by in her boss form, are in fact fire angels, and she is a fire angel in her boss form. It literally makes sense. This is not even a contradiction in logic. Do keep in mind, though, that I am not saying Peruer and Ajax are going to get married. I don't think Hoyoverse would do such a thing for their playable characters, but the marriage or union of Ajax the hero with the first Sealy back during the era of the First Civilization sets a precedent for such an alliance to later reoccur between 2 characters who may parallel their fates in the current Tevat of the modern era. Those characters, of course, being Ajax the Fool and Peruer. Now, even if all of this does not end up happening, and I am severely overthinking the opening scene of Skirk's character teaser, I think you guys can still see how this future possibility has a lot of solid hints, both in lore and in story, and also in character design. Anyway, let's move on to the rest of the trailer.
そうだな。そういえば、俺が卒業した日、3つの質問をしていいと言われた。まずは、ずっと不思議だったんだけど、なんで俺を弟子にしてくれたの？
お前があれを呼び覚ましたからだ。私が教えた武芸が将来役に立つだろう。
Okay, so Skirk tells Tartaglia that the reason she decided to train him is because when she found him in the abyss, he awakened it. What is it? Well, there are many different possibilities, and one of those many different possibilities is he awakened the all-devouring narwhal, which is the embodiment of his constellation, which is also Sortalogi's pet. And by the way, the reason I am saying that is because you can literally see the shadow of the all-devouring narwhal swimming beneath them.
したからだ。私が教えた武芸が将来役に
Look,
立つ
do
だ
you
ろ
see the narwhal? It's swimming beneath
う。も
them.
ちろん、生きて帰るには もっと強くならなければならない。
Now, of course, she could be talking about a few other things that are adjacent to the narwhal, like, for example, maybe she sensed that Tartaglia is compatible with the Abyss, or maybe she somehow sensed that Tartaglia has some form of fate connection with Ajax the hero, something along those lines. However, I don't really think you can separate these concepts from the all-devouring narwhal. No matter how you spin it, the all-devouring narwhal is somehow connected to all of these different ideas and concepts that are related to the overall character of Tartaglia, of Ajax.
ないわ。
すでにいろいろ習っ
Oh, and one more thing, this scene that you are watching right now, guys, is probably taking place at the end in the artifact set finale of the Deep Galleries. Because in that artifact set, the story starts with Surtalogi the Foul, the sinner, sending his disciple Skirk into the frozen tundra of Snezhnaya in order to search for the Voyager who inhabited Ajax the hero. I already made a video about this, the link is going to be in the description. And while Skirk was searching for Ajax the hero, the story ends with her finding an unnamed treasure. This treasure could in fact be Ajax himself, Ajax the Fool. So instead of finding the Voyager, she found the, the spiritual successor or the fate successor of the hero whom the Voyager inhabited. This is also, I suppose, geographically congruent with Tartaglia, since Skirk was sent by Surtalogi into the frozen tundra in order to search for the Voyager who used to live in the Hyperborea, at least for a limited amount of time, in the body of Ajax the hero, and the Hyperborea had the Golden City, which sunk beneath the earth, and Tartaglia, well, our Ajax, Ajax the Fool, fell into the abyss, and there he found a destroyed city, and that city is implied to be the Golden City that Skirk was sent into in order to look for the Voyager. You guys can see how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together, and why it makes sense for this scene to be taking place at the end of finale of the Deep Galleries. Let's continue.
ただろどうやってもっと強くなればいいんだよ
まだ基礎だけだ。弓の扱いもまだ荒い。形ある武器を完全に極めれば次のステージに行けるだろう。
I think lore-wise he is supposed to be like 14 in this scene, but regardless of what age he is, he's clearly a young teenager, and in this young age, Ajax mastered all physical weapons. So he mastered the spear, the sword, the claymore perhaps, and well, the only thing that he needs to work on is his bow, which is why Tartaglia uses a bow in his playable form in Genshin. This is a super impressive thing, and it speaks volumes on the skill and potential of Ajax the Fool, who will certainly be a very important character later down the line. And Skirk herself acknowledges this reality.
弓の扱いもまだ荒い。極めれば次のステージに行けるだろう。
Notice what Skirk is about to say.
すべてを手中の刃と化し、神羅万象を自在に操るのだ。
Okay, heaven and earth become your blades. All of creation bends to your will. So, Skirk tells Tartaglia that him mastering all physical weapons is not enough. Once he's completed that, which he did, he now has to master heaven and earth and turn them into his blades so that all of creation bends to his will. This line is deceptively philosophical, by the way, and it is such a cool detail by Hoyoverse. This is one of Genshin's biggest strengths. Genshin is a very, very well-designed game in terms of its integration of mythology, theology, and philosophy. It does it really well. When Skirk says heaven and earth become your blades, there are, well, it looks like she is saying there are two different aspects that he has to master. However, in reality, there are three. Heaven and earth are the obvious two concepts, and Skirk says they should become your blades in order to have all of creation bend to your will. Now, what does the word will imply in Genshin Impact? One of the things it could imply, the most likely one, is the will of the Descenders, which can literally reshape the world and reshape fate and reshape creation. And this is very relevant to Tartaglia because remember, Tartaglia is Ajax, who is the successor of Ajax the hero, whom the Voyager inhabited. And the Voyager is the most likely founder of Khaenri'ah, since Ajax the hero had the trademark star eyes, which all Khaenri'ans, well, most Khaenri'ans including Dainsleif and Kaya have. And the Voyager herself is by far the most likely candidate for the identity of the second Descender. So the Voyager, just like the Traveler, and just like the third Descender, and just like the Primordial One, she probably had a will that can rival an entire world. So Skirk sees in Ajax a potential that she herself lacks, hence why she took him in. Because at the start of Skirk's animated short, which I reviewed very recently, as I stated at the start of this video, Surtaloji the Foul tells Skirk that she is not worthy of the title of a Descender because she lacks the will to rival a world, just as René de Petrichor describes in his notes in the Narcissus Ordo. However, Surtaloji says that Skirk is not worthy yet, therefore she does have the potential. But what's poetic about this is that she sees the same potential that Surtaloji sees in her in Ajax, her own disciple. Now, let's go back very quickly. With that context in mind, let us go back to the line, "Heaven and earth become your blades." As I said earlier, this is part of three different components. The two that are named are heaven and earth. The third one is actually humanity. And in this situation, humanity, in terms of analyzing this concept, would be Ajax Tartaglia, the one who wields heaven and earth as his blades, the conduit, the connection, the consciousness between heaven and earth, the will that rivals a world, the logic, the logos, the crown of logos, literally, in the artifact sets, who rules and dictates fate. And this is currently the role of the Primordial One, and this is the type of power that Skirk wants Ajax to achieve, and I suppose that she herself wants to achieve later down the line. The implication here, if my theory or my analysis is true, which I think it is at this point in the story, the implication is that Surtaloji already achieved this power, or is very, very close to achieving it, therefore Skirk and Ajax are essentially gunning after him. They're trying to keep up or catch up with him. And to provide you with even more context, this whole concept of heaven, earth, and humanity, the developers and the writers of Genshin combine two different concepts from Christianity and Taoism. For those who might not know, Taoism is a Chinese religion. And in Taoism, the three supreme gods are called the three purities. They are also known as the three pure ones, and they are the highest divinities in the Taoist pantheon. They are respectively called Yuanshi Tianzun, representing heaven, and then Lingbao Tianzun, representing humanity, and finally Dao De Tianzun, representing the earth. In some traditions of Taoism, they also represent the past, present, and future, but you don't need to worry about that for now. What you need to know, though, is that the three purities are most likely combined with the Holy Trinity from Christianity in Genshin in order to form the fundamental rules of the Triketra symbol within Tevat, which symbolizes Celestia and most likely symbolizes the authority of the Primordial One and the Omni Element, which is the combination of all 7 elements in Genshin Impact. Now, the reason the developers combine the Taoist pure ones with the Holy Trinity, which, by the way, it's called the Holy Trinity. However, in Christianity, the Holy Trinity is a single God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He is the one single God, but the overall general idea remains the same. So the developers take the idea of the Holy Trinity, combine it with the 3 Taoist pure ones in Genshin, and then they create the concept of the Triketra, where you have heaven, humanity, and earth. Or, from the Christian perspective, you have heaven, and then you have consciousness, which represents the Word, that would be Jesus, and Jesus is, of course, the Son of Man, representing in a way the human aspect of God, or I should say the human incarnation of God himself, becoming a flesh in the form of Jesus, and then, of course, we have earth. And then, of course, we have earth, which is the material world, and Jesus would be the consciousness, the Word, the will, the logos, which governs heaven and earth and maintains the balance between them. This idea from Christian theology and philosophy is quite congruent with the Taoist 3 pure ones. In fact, if you go back into ancient China, there are certain sects of Taoism which take inspiration from Christianity. This is specifically going to be in Eastern China, where Christian traders would have interacted with like the ancient Chinese, and then both of them interacting would have influenced each other. But all of that aside, as you guys can see, the two concepts of heaven, earth, and humanity, and then heaven, the consciousness, and earth, both of them fit very well. And the developers, to their credit, noticed this and use it extremely well in Genshin to embody the will of the Descender. This is why Skirk says to Tartaglia, heaven and earth must become your blades, you must wield them as a humanity in order for all of creation to bend to your will. And this takes us back to, well, I suppose it would be Dainsleif, telling the Traveler that the winner between them at the end of the world in the Sea of Flowers will get to reshape the threads of fate. So their will get to reshape the fate of Tevat. And by extension, the fate of the world Tevat is on. Now, I am currently yapping about relatively complex theological and philosophical concepts without any cohesion or structure, so if you guys are interested in this topic and learning more about it, and you want a proper, complete, and precise explanation of the entire concept, then feel free to check out this lore video which I made about this exact topic, where I go into complete detail and discuss it in a much better way than whatever the hell I just said right here. Okay, is there anything else I want to mention regarding this topic? Well, I suppose I could tell you this, however, before I open my mouth, be careful, take the following with a huge grain of salt. In the Chinese description of the artifact set, Finale of the Deep Galleries, which of course tells about the journey of Skirk when Surtalogy sent her to look for the Voyager, while inhabiting the body of Ajax the hero, is called or referred to in Chinese using the same Chinese character which is used in the Chinese translation of the Bible to refer to Jesus' title as the Son of Man. And just as I laid out, Jesus represents the Word, the Logos, the consciousness, which governs heaven and earth in creation. While Genshin's developers combine this theological property of the Holy Trinity with the Taoist Three Pure Ones, or the Three Purities of heaven, humanity, and earth, in order to create the Triquetra, right? So if Ajax the hero, while he was being inhabited by the Voyager, is referenced using the same Chinese character, which means Son of Man in reference to Jesus in the Bible, and Tartaglia is the spiritual successor of Ajax the hero in modern Tevat, then it makes sense why Tartaglia has a Triquetra symbolizing his elemental burst, because once again, Ajax the hero had a descender in him who had a will that rivals a world. That would be the consciousness, that would be the Word, the Logos, Jesus, so humanity in Taoism, and then you have the two concepts of heaven and earth. This is the type of power that Skirk tells Ajax he has to master. Therefore, it makes sense that Ajax, who learned his combat skills from Skirk, has a Triquetra symbolizing his elemental burst. Since Skirk taught him this concept of heaven, earth, and humanity, and she herself learned it from Surtalogy the Foul, who is most likely either at that level or really, really close to achieving that divine level of Descenders and Primordial One and all of that stuff. But be careful, I just told you to take this with a massive grain of salt. Why? Because, well, the character in the Chinese Bible, which refers to Jesus as Son of Man, can also simply imply, well, human. It is like the generic character for human. Therefore, this whole thing is super context dependent, and Ajax the hero might not be like a representation of Jesus. Regardless, whether he is or he is not in the form of the Voyager inhabiting him, that does not erase everything else I discussed. This is a very minor detail. Anyway, let's finish the trailer.
強くなるって楽しいことじゃないの？あ？師匠？
Of course, this is Skirk yeeting Tartaglia, a reference to her yeeting him in the Primordial Sea after Nouvellette and the Traveler defeated Tahor.
それで師匠は何と？
深淵を離れるとき、師匠が最後にこう言ったのが聞こえた。いつか滅びゆく星々を越えていけば、お前にも私の見ている世界は見えるようになるだろう。
Okay, first of all, the music is super good, but aside from that, there are two details we need to discuss here. Skirk's, well, three, I guess. Now we have three. Skirk's eyes, this is the third one, did not have the quantum symbol on them before she met Surtalogy. This scene is her. You can see she is crying. Yeah, she is crying, and the tears on her eyes dried up because she saw something horrifying. And that horrifying thing is later revealed to be this planet, or this moon, which is getting destroyed. We don't know what this thing is. I'm gonna get into it in a few seconds, but let's go back to Skirk's eyes. The implication here is that young Skirk, she might have had a different name, but regardless, young Skirk, before Surtalogy found her, did not have the quantum eyes, and those special eyes are ones that she gained while being trained by Surtalogy the Foul. You can also see the back of young Skirk, and you can see her fins. Therefore, unlike her eyes, Skirk's fins are actually part of her body, and this could just be a feature of her species or a feature of her race, similar to what we observe with the Helovians in Star Rail. The Helovians are a humanoid species in Star Rail who have special features in the form of wings behind their ears, angel wings, and an angelic halo above their head, which I believe is granted to them by the Eon of Harmony, I think. You can see these special features on characters like Robin and characters like Sunday, who are playable Helovians in Honkai Star Rail, and Skirk, she is obviously not a Helovian. I was just using the Helovians to draw a comparison. They are an example, because based on our knowledge of the Helovians, we can assume or surmise that Skirk herself belongs to one such a humanoid species, which has a special feature, and that special feature are the fins on her back. We currently don't know what the name of her species or race are, however, we are probably going to learn this very soon, I hope so, in version 5.7 when her story quest comes out.
お前にも私の見ている世界は見えるようになるだろう。
So this is very interesting because Skirk tells Tartaglia that he has to essentially become like her and learn how to live outside of Teyvat so that he can learn how the world is as she sees it. There are many different theories which I have seen so far for as to what this thing is. Some people suggest that it is Teyvat, and the red part is like the firmament. Some people suggest that this is a moon being destroyed, whether it is a moon from Skirk's homeworld or a moon from Teyvat, we do not know. However, that theory is very solid. Alternatively, however, Skirk herself might be on the moon. She might be on the moon of her homeworld, and she is looking at her homeworld being destroyed. So this planetary object we are about to see, this could be her homeworld being destroyed, and Skirk herself is on one of the satellites of her homeworld. That might explain why we see her horrified and crying in this scene. So the tears in her eyes dried up, and that scene which scares her to the point where she cannot move is probably the sight of her world being destroyed in the form of this red glowing planet. Of course, this is just a super preliminary theory I made on the spot as I am reviewing this character teaser for the very first time. Therefore, feel free to share what you guys think this object is. Is it Teyvat? Is it one of the moons of Teyvat that are being destroyed? Is it one of the moons of Skirk's world which is being destroyed? Or perhaps, do you agree with me, and this scene is depicting Skirk looking at her planet being destroyed by some evil force, which could be an invading alien army, or could be, well, I guess the Abyss. As you guys can see, Skirk is not even out, and she already has presented us with a shit ton of lore to consider and think about. So one can only imagine the amount of stuff we will learn on the day of her release. And I, of course, am looking forward to seeing all of that. Needless to say, Genshin is entering the Star Rail era. We are gonna have Genshin Star Rail soon. I'm just joking, but Genshin is, of course, reaching that point where we are now integrating it into the rest of the Hoyoverse, which by proxy integrates Genshin into the Star Rail universe. Since Honkai Star Rail is all about the Nameless exploring the Hoyoverse, the universe of Honkai. Obviously, just as I mentioned in my previous analysis of the animated short, Skirk's animated short, this does not mean Hoyoverse are going to suddenly have the Astral Express show up on Teyvat. Rather, the developers are now paving the way for Genshin to soon be integrated into the remainder of the Hoyoverse, and therefore open up the possibilities for many different storylines with many different factions in the future once the Teyvat chapter, the Teyvat storyline is resolved with Dainsleif at the end of the world. If you ask me, to be honest, I already think Fuli might be somewhat involved with Teyvat. For those of you who might not know, Fuli is the Aeon of Remembrance in Star Rail and in the Hoyoverse in general, since the Star Rail is exploring the Hoyoverse. The Voyager, from the way she is described in Finale of the Deep Galleries, appears to be related to Fuli's path. But yeah, anyway, I'm not gonna extend the video beyond this point. I have covered pretty much everything important that I wanted to cover. I am looking forward for Skirk's story quest and the Dainsleif Archon quest in version 5.7, and until then, thank you for watching. I've been My Name for now, and I will catch you in the next time. Take care.